Brilliant, thank you. Well, welcome everyone to the Natural Cambridgeshire Partnership Forum. My first, and some of yours first, and many of yours multiple times. We have a wonderful selection of talks today, and there will be opportunities to ask questions of all of the speakers as well. We're going to run it first of all, we're going to have The Life of Bats by Antony, and then some questions after then, if you have questions for him. If you can pop questions in the chat, Helen and I will keep an eye on those and make sure we answer as many as we can. If we have lots and lots of questions, we may then have to refer them on to Antony afterwards if we don't have time to accommodate them all. And then we'll take the two farming related talks together from Rob Wise and from Lottie, Alves, and have questions after that. And then we'll have the ancient trees and the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Nature Fund. So I wonder if we could start off by our bravely doing it from a car on the M1, Antony Mould, who is going to talk to us about the life of bats. Welcome, Antony.
Hi there. I'll just so you can see who I am, and here's my face, but I'm going to take myself off video. Yes, I'm Antony Mould from Cambridgeshire Bat Group. I'm going to give us a, let me just start that. There we go, a whirlwind 15-minute tour of bats, just a little bit about bats generally, and then I'll talk a bit about some of the British species and the ones that we get in Cambridgeshire itself. So if we can have the next slide. So bats, after rodents, they're the second most diverse group of mammals in the world. There's about 1,400 different species at the minute. New ones are being discovered all the time. In the old days, they used to be split into two groups, which was quite simple, which was pretty much big bats, fruit bats, and nectivorous bats, and then all the other bats, predominantly insectivorous bats. But then genetic analysis has changed things a bit. So we now have these two groups. The fruit bats are now lumped in with quite a diverse group of bats. But there's 18 different families in there, and they're all very different. So if we go on to the next slide, please.
Apologies.
Just next slide.
Bear with. There we go.
There we are. So just quick, so on the right hand side there we have got a typical fruit bat, large bats, fruit eaters. They don't echolocate, so they don't use sounds, although there's an exception to every rule. So there are a couple that do very basic echolocation. But large bats, they are very important seed dispersers in rainforests, got that very sort of dog-like face, and they're flying foxes. On the left-hand side at the top, that's just another, that's a horseshoe bat, which is another group of bats that are sort of lumped in with the fruit bats now. Crazy faces, that face is all set up for listening to sound to see in the dark, and that big nose leaf is used to generate and direct sound, and then listening to the echoes. And then down at the bottom, just an example of a small insectivorous bat, a typically sort of small brown job, really. And there are lots of different groups of those. But if we go on to the next slide, just to give a couple of examples, some of them can be in all sorts of shapes and sizes and colours. On the left-hand side there, we've got some tent-making bats. Those guys use banana tree leaves, and they go underneath them and they actually snip all the side veins so that the leaves fold in, and they create little bivouacs, and they roost underneath them. And then on the right hand side there is a very spectacular painted bat with that sort of gorgeous coloration. Next slide, please. So a little bit about why bats are very different from other mammals. So first thing being that they fly, they properly fly, they have true powered flight. The only other things that kind of do that are things like sugar gliders that run up trees and then jump off and glide. But bats, the Latin for bat is chiroptera, which means hand wing. And as you can see there, the wing is just a modified hand. We've got the thumb sticking out of the top, and then straight down from that, with that little bone there, is the little finger, and the other fingers are splayed out. And then the skin that we all have just between our fingers has been really elongated. And then from the little finger, it stretches down to the foot and creates these wings. And that allows them to fly, which is good for getting around and for exploiting other sources of food, so aerial insects. If then we move on again. And the other really cool thing about bats is that they echolocate. So they use sound to see, and to see in the dark, in pitch black, which again allows them to exploit a food niche that not really anything else is particularly using, and it also helps them to avoid predators. Echolocation is very complicated, but it's basically shouting very loud across a range of frequencies of sound that carry information, and then doing things like timing how long it takes for an echo to come back to you to work out how far something is away. These guys are doing that in pitch black. They are listening for tiny little insects, and some of the things that they can do are very, very impressive. So you could spend an hour just talking about echolocation. It's very complicated, so I won't necessarily do that now, but it's one of the fantastic things about them. Next slide, please. Talk a little bit about the life cycle. I'm going to talk about British bats, which includes sort of hibernation. In the tropics, bats don't bother to hibernate because they don't need to. But if we start at the top there, we've got a little bundle of soprano pipistrelles in a bat box. This time of year is the mating season. So at the moment, male bats will be holding territories and they will be defending roost sites. And they will, aside from echolocating, they will be using a range of social calls and basically singing to the females to attract them. And if I do something like going and checking a bat box at this time of year, and I find a little clump of bats in there, it will undoubtedly be a load of females and one happy little male. So the males sort of defend harems of females, and you may sometimes notice that the females are sort of they're healthy weight and they're looking quite good, and the males are looking a bit skinnier. The males are very much mating is what is on their mind, whereas the females are being far more sensible and they're actually looking to the future and to the oncoming winter. And during winter, what we don't have is a food source, so insects very much disappear. So to deal with that, bats go into true hibernation. They're small animals and they have a big surface area with those wings, so they lose a lot of energy very fast. So in the autumn, they're gaining body weight, and then in winter, they're finding cool, stable sort of sites, quite often underground sites that are humid, because water is a very important requirement for them. And we have a number of underground hibernation sites in Cambridgeshire. Not all species hibernate underground. Something like the common or the pipistrelles, which are our commonest bats, pretty much just disappear. And as far as we know, they're hibernating in more exposed places like under roof tiles, in trees, and things like that. But all bats, so when they're in hibernation, they're dropping their heartbeats to sort of once a minute, twice a minute, something like that. And they are absolutely sort of out cold. If the temperature does go up and opportunities arise, they will go out to forage, and they may well wake up to drink, but they can go for months without food. Come springtime and they're coming out of hibernation, and they are very malnourished, they're very hungry. So what they are looking to do is absolutely like slam on body weight as fast as they can. So part of the reason that the females are mating in the autumn is so that in the springtime they are not spending a lot of energy doing that. So they've actually stored the sperm over the winter, and then they fertilize the eggs in the springtime, and then come late May, early June, they will be giving birth. Typically, they are giving birth to a single live young. They're not like mice and rats, you know, having litters of babies. They can only have one baby typically. And part of the reason is for that is that if you're flying about, flying is quite difficult as it is, let alone if you've got a payload of sort of 8 or 10 babies. So one little pup is pretty much it. The females will form a maternity roost. So you'll get a large aggregation of females, allows them to keep nice and warm, allows the fetus to develop well. And then once they give birth to the young, those will latch on and they'll drink milk. But when the bats go out to feed at night, when the adults go out, you basically have a little creche of young bats, and you'll get odd females staying behind to kind of look after them, and then other females will come in and out. So they're kind of looking after the young communally. The males are off on their own. They get booted out of these roosts, and they'll just be roosting either alone or in small groups. And then come sort of July time, the young will start to be on the wing, making mistakes, crashing and doing all the things they do. And there's lots of social activity. If you're at a roost site, say a church, sort of in the evenings or more in the morning, first thing in the morning, if you go out, you'll get a little spectacle. The bats actually swarm before they go into the roost, so you can have these little clouds of bats. I've been out at a church with about 300 pipistrelles, and they're all flying around outside the roost in the morning, and they're basically exchanging information, socializing before they go back in. So if we go on to the next slide, please. We'll just briefly cover the British bats. So typically or historically, we've had 16 breeding species in this country, and they're split into different families. We've got horseshoe bats, long-eared bats, pipistrelles, through to myotis bats, which is a bigger group of bats which are harder to tell apart. If we go down to the bottom, I've just highlighted two others. A couple of years ago, we in Britain discovered a new species, which was the Alcathoe whiskered bat. And it wasn't necessarily new, it had just been hiding in plain sight, very difficult to tell apart from the whiskered and Brandt's bat, and it took sort of genetic analysis to highlight that we did actually have a species that we didn't know about. And then the mouse-eared bat was officially declared extinct from this country in 1990, but then a solitary male has cropped up in a underground site in Sussex over the winter. I forget how many years now, but for a long time. So that's the only one that's really known of. He did disappear for a couple of years ago, and we thought he'd died, but he has turned up again. So we still have at least one mouse-eared bat in this country. So I'll just look at a couple of the commoner ones briefly, if we have the next slide. So, well, actually, yes, no, sorry, this one I've just highlighted, the ones that are in dark black again, that's the ones we get in Cambridgeshire. So we get 12 species in Cambridgeshire at the minute. The horseshoe bats, which are off to the west and southwest, are slowly making progress and moving back over this way. They're in Northamptonshire now, and hopefully in the not too distant future, we may have horseshoe bats back in the county, but we'll wait and see. Next slide, please. So pipistrelle bats, commonest species. That's one sits on the end of your thumb. That person should have been wearing gloves. That photo was taken a long time ago. Yes, insectivorous bats eating midges. If we go on to the next slide. Once upon a time, we had a single species. The two on the left now, soprano and common pipistrelle, were actually separated out. They call it different frequencies. Common pipistrelles call it 45 kilohertz, sopranos which call higher at 55. And then on the right hand side, we have the Nethusius pipistrelle, which is sort of a species that's now colonising the county. And those maps are basically just showing the top ones of the records that the bat group has for all bats. Common and soprano pipistrelles pretty similar, Nethusius a lot less common, and the bottom three are actual known roosting sites, either summer sites or winter sites. If we go to the next slide, please. Long-eared bats, called because of those amazing long ears. These guys actually whisper. So most bats, when they're echolocating, they're almost shouting, almost like car alarms, just beyond our hearing. Long-eared bats actually whisper. One of their favoured insects are moths, which have a sort of rudimentary ear on their knees, and they can pick up echolocation and they can sort of take evasive action. Long-eared bats overcome that by whispering, but they need those big ears to hear the echoes. And they also they glean off of vegetation, so they passively listen to insects crawling on vegetation and pick them off the vegetation. So if you just look at the next slide. Again, they're pretty common, widely distributed. Harder to pick up on bat detectors because they whisper. So, but we do know of quite a lot of roosting sites, as shown on the right-hand side there. These maps, I should say, a lot of the gaps are just because we haven't looked there, not necessarily because the bats aren't there. I would expect the pipistrelles to pretty much cover the county, and probably long-eared bats as well. But this is what we know from our records. Next slide, please. Daubenton's bats, this is one of the Myotis bats, that bigger group of bats, all of which have sort of these white bellies. Daubenton's are quite nice because they forage over water and they trawl and grab insects off the water. So if you're out looking over a water body in the evening and you see bats pretty much skimming on the water, that's these Daubenton's, and it's an easy way to tell them apart from some of the others. These guys hibernate underground, so they're one of the ones that we find quite regularly. And if you go to the next slide. Again, they're quite well distributed. The records will be near water bodies. On the right-hand side, most of those records will actually be hibernation sites. We don't know about many sort of roosting sites. So yeah, but we encounter them underground. So next slide. I'm nearly finished. And just finally, the bigger bats that we get. So this is a nocturnal bat, and these have got like this nice, sleek, glossy coat. These are aerial hawkers, so they fly around high up in the sky typically, whereas a lot of the bats are taking midges and small insects. These will take larger beetles and cockchafers. Yes, there's a closely related bat called a Leisler's bat. We don't know where many of these roost. They're typically tree-dwelling bats, but if we go to the next slide. They're reasonably common again, and on the bat detector they sound quite different. Rather than a pitter-patter sound, they're sort of like a chonk, 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 so they're quite obvious when you hear them. On the right-hand side, it's generally summer roosts that we've got, because again, they hibernate in trees and things that we don't know about. That very top record that we've got there is a well-known summer roost in March, the town of March, and it's a roost of, it has had up to 180 females. We're down to around 130 at the minute. And we've been monitoring that site for about 30 years now. These are tree-dwelling bats, and that's a roost that is in a building in the middle of the fens where there are no trees nearby. And that's it really. I'm going to leave it there. There are more species. There's much more I could say, but that's a whirlwind tour. If you're interested in the bat group, we have a Facebook page. We have a membership. If you want to become a member of the group and get involved in some of the activities we do, then yes, find us on Facebook, or we've got a website as well, which you can Google.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I had no idea on some of those facts. And I thought I kind of had a reasonable grasp of natural history. So fascinating. Thank you so much. So we've got a couple of questions or comments in the chat. The first one is from Elizabeth May, asking why are the bats moving west? Is it improving environment or global warming, or do we not really know?
Yeah, so horseshoe bats are very much tied to buildings, I mean, once upon a time we had horseshoe bats in London, and sort of over this way. Combination of loss of roosts, agricultural intensification, all those sorts of things. Horseshoe bats dwindled. Very sensitive because of the close association with buildings. They managed to keep a stronghold in sort of Devon, Cornwall, South Wales, and there's been quite a concerted effort to protect roosting sites when we find them. So stone buildings, basements, things like that. And over time, more of those sites have been kind of protected and looked after. And then in combination with that, I mean, they are a continental species as well. Generally speaking, we've done more to conserve them, and they are slowly creeping back and just recolonizing. But yes, historically, once upon a time, 100 years ago, we did have horseshoe bats in this part of the country. They were just particularly sensitive to all of the impacts that we've had on them over the last 100 years.
Brilliant, thank you. Shows how much kind of understanding life cycles and, you know, the environment that is necessary for nature to come back and thrive is so important.
Absolutely. There was an article in British Wildlife about a month ago from a horseshoe bat site that's been monitored for 50 years. So, you know, in some cases we have a lot of detailed information about what's going, including a fire that happened at that site where a load of the bats got wiped out. And when you've got a maternity roost of all the females, you can wipe out a whole population in one foul swoop, including pest control, which also happened in the past.
Brilliant. I just got a question from Wendy, and I've also got Justin has got his hand up as well, and Stephen has got a question. So Wendy starts off by congratulating you. I assume you can't see the chats because you're on your phone,
No.
saying fascinating talk, and saying what about Cambridge's Paradise Nature Reserve and the rare barbastels there, and you know, yeah.
So I'm not sure what the Paradise site. Well, I don't know if there's Everton and Wimpole Triple SI, which has a maternity roost of barbastels. I just didn't really have the time to go through everything, but barbastels are a sort of jet black sort of colour. They look quite different. Once upon a time, we thought they were very rare. We're actually finding them more and more, and it's more about looking for them. But they're tree-dwelling bats, and they roost underneath things like flaky bark. So their roosts are very transitional. So once we find a roost, doesn't mean it's going to be there for long, and then we have to try and find them again. So
certainly in Norfolk, where they were looking to build a road that connects the ring road completely around Norwich, and discovered what turns out potentially to be the UK's largest barbastel roost, hiding presumably in some plain sight with some people knowing about it, or potentially more ephemeral than everyone realised. So yeah, I think this is really tricky, which is why it's so important as the Cambridgeshire Bat Group. Stephen Tompkins asks, where in the county are you shortest of records?
Generally the Fens, because I mean, there are hotspots for where there are members, particularly Cambridge, Peterborough, that's where I am, so I do quite a lot of looking. But yeah, we're kind of, you know, always looking for members who are interested in, you know, doing things, even just going out with a bat detector and picking things up. So, but there's not a huge amount of people, so it's quite a large county, lots of open space where there aren't that many people. So,
and do you have some of the latest acoustic material, you know, the equipment as well?
Yeah, some people, I mean, most people in the group a lot of them are consultants, so have access to that sort of stuff. So we've had sort of remote bat detectors left out where we've left them with people for a week, and then we collect the records. And whereas in one evening you might have found pipistrelles and something else, suddenly you find all these different species that might just be flitting past briefly. So getting a better idea about things. And we do like mist netting and things where we use lures as well to bring the bats in, which can often pick up other species that we wouldn't do otherwise.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think I've just got two further questions from hands up from Justin Tilley and Roger Mitchell, and then we'll
Justin,
move on to the next talk.
Hi Anthony, excellent talk, thank you. Just wanted to ask you about you mentioned the March nocturnal roost, which is obviously fascinating to have that sort of level of data over a long period of time. Are there any thoughts around, are there any other sites which have sort of comparable length data sets so that there's some comparison or some analysis could be done as to why those fluctuations take place? Do you think it's about things like weather conditions, prey availability and so on, or is it more down to local factors related to the roost itself as to why we're seeing those sort of changing, quite dramatic changes in usage of that roost over time?
Yeah, it's really hard to tell. I mean, comparable roosts with nocturals, there's the National Bat Monitoring Programme, we've like provide our records to that national programme, and that sort of creates all the trends for bats across the UK. I think there's something like there's only 12 nocturnal roosts that are included in that programme, and actually only 5 are actively counted. So nocturals are very much underrepresented. In terms of the March site, we don't really know why. There were a lot of concerns about wind turbines at one point, because nocturals are high flying bats, but that's very difficult to pin down. I mean, we've gone at one point, we had, like 170 odd, and then we were down to sort of 80. But it also depends on when the counts are done. When we look at the sort of the long-term trends with just the adult bats, they've stayed relatively constant. But there was definitely a switch in sort of the early 2000s when I think the females were actually switching roosts and going somewhere else. But it's difficult to show that as well. Radio tagging we could do, but when we want to be doing it when it's a maternity roost, and the bats are very sensitive and they've got young, so that's very difficult to do as well. So I mean, the long-term data with adults is kind of suggesting they're quite stable. It's just how they're using the roost is changing quite a bit, I think. And I mean, things seem to be very much to how things were pre sort of 2004. So I don't know really. I'm just happy that they're sort of there in the same sort of numbers, at least adults wise.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you. And I know that work has been going on with DNA testing in some of the sites as well, looking at source sites and sync sites for bats, with some surprising results. Roger, you have the floor for the last question. You're on mute.
Sorry, on mute. Yes, great talk, Antony. Thanks very much. Many years since I had a bat detector, but there's an awful lot, when you look at a catalogue, an awful lot of bat detectors now, and some you can plug bits in your mobile phone. Can you recommend sort of the cheapest bat detector where we can actually get good results and send our results into you?
In terms of sort of very good sort of bog standard ones are things like bat boxes, which or Petersons that you can get, which are about 100 and 120 pounds. They don't record, which is one of the things that's, we can kind of tell pipistrelles apart because of how they're caught. You can tell the difference between 45 and 55, but even nocturals, telling them apart from Elizla without recording them is a bit tricky. The ones that you can, I think they're called echometers, you can plug into your phone. They show up almost live what they think they are, but they can be quite, I wouldn't necessarily trust what the detector's telling you, but you can take recordings on those. So there's 2 different versions. I think there's sort of a general one and then a sort of a professional one. And I've had people who said they've heard this and they've sent me the recordings, and they're pretty good for analysing, so that's not too bad. And there's another one called a Pearsonic, which looks like it's from the 1970s, but it's a chap from Australia who built them with the intention of them being relatively cheap, but being good for recording. They're still about £250, but compared to some of the others that take recordings, you can be £1,000 plus. I'm not sure how much the remote detectors are, because they're quite good because you can stick them out for a week. We've got some in the back group. If people want to know, I can find out which ones those are and how much they cost. But the echometers, I mean, if you're taking recordings from them, the recordings you get are pretty good, and I think that the basic one is quite cheap. So
thanks, Anthony. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And I know the BTO has been doing some work with citizen science around this and loaning out recorders. So yes, there are some other options as well. Well, I just want to say thank you, because I know you'll be disappearing now. Yes. Wonderful that your battery has lasted long enough to give us this wonderful tour de force. Lots of messages in the chat saying thank you so much for a brilliant talk, and I'd just like to add my thanks to that too. So cool. Thank you. And
thank you.
Farewell.
Cheers.
Bye. Right, so now we move on to a double-hander in terms of looking in the farming community, and our first speaker here is Rob Wise from the NFU, who is their environmental advisor. And it's part of a series of talks around the work of the Natural Cambridgeshire's partners. And so wonderfully, the slide has appeared. Thank you very much to Helen Dye, who is facilitating all of this in the background. So Rob, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pamela. Hopefully my screen has been shared.
Yes, it has.
Excellent, good. Okay, so I was asked to talk a little bit about the work and the role of the NFU, which I'm very happy to do. I'm the East Anglia Environment Advisor. The NFU is set up with a headquarters staff in Stoneleigh, Warwickshire, and then regional teams around the country. The East Anglia region covers Norfolk, Suffolk, Essex, Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire, and Cambridgeshire. So that's my patch. So Cambridgeshire is just a part of the day job, not the whole day job. And first off, the NFU misconceptions. The number of people that sometimes think we're actually a part of government, were that but true? And we could actually dictate policy, but we can't. We're also not an insurance company. We are closely aligned to the NFU Mutual, and I'll mention that again a bit later, but essentially we're a trade association where farmers pay to belong to us, to get information from us, and also for us to represent their interests, both at a local, national and international level. So we have 47,000 members across England and Wales, and we have a little over 1,000 members in Cambridgeshire. So Cambridgeshire itself, in terms of its farming, is very much a powerhouse within the country. It's 3% of England's total agricultural production, worth over £500 million. And we're particularly strong in our combinable crops. And within that, we produce 12% of the country's sugar beet, 8% of the country's potatoes, and 7.5% of the vegetables and salad grown in England. That basic agricultural production also supports a lot of very locally based supply chain industries, both upstream of us and downstream of us, particularly processing and packing and distribution, that results in the fact that within Cambridgeshire itself, there are over 25,000 jobs associated with the supply chain. And Cambridgeshire is, at least the Cambridgeshire Fens, are part of an even bigger powerhouse of fruit and vegetable production, in salad and vegetable production in particular. I'm sure some of you will have seen our report, Delivering for Britain, that focuses on the Fens as a whole, which goes up into Lincolnshire, a little bit Norfolk and a tiny bit Suffolk. But essentially, a lot of that employment and processing and distribution is based in the northern part of the county. And overall, the Fens are a £3 billion plus part of the UK economy. It's also an incredibly important part of the world for biodiversity, in that we have 3,800 miles of watercourses that are, as some people refer to them, the inverted ditches of the inverted hedges, rather, of the Cambridgeshire landscape, where some of those 13,000 species that are known to the Fens live. The NFU would like to think of ourselves as thought leaders. As part of our dialogue with government, we are constantly trying to make the case for the role of the farming community. And I'm going to take you through now just some of the reports that we've put in to government and are available to share with the wider public. And I'll give you a link at the end to where you can get hold of any of these reports. We have always said that farmers have a dual role as food producers, fibre producers as well, but also as custodians of the countryside. And so our report on uniting our environment, food and our future, put out a couple of years ago, stressed the importance of how food production sits at the heart of getting things right for water, air and soil quality, while also allowing those elements to deliver for biodiversity. And what's equally important is making sure that we protect the landscapes that we know and love, and provide the access for people to that countryside. And I think, as you won't need me to tell you, lockdown certainly proved the value of being able to get out and about in the countryside. More recently, we have turned our attention to net zero, and were one of the first organizations representing an industry to come out and say what we thought we could achieve. And while the government set a goal of achieving net zero by 2040, by 2050, we have said that we think that as an industry, we can get there by 2040. Now, it's important to remember that we're not saying that every farm can get to net zero, but across English and Welsh farms, we believe in aggregate, we can get the industry to net zero. So some farms will get net positive, whereas others may not get there all the way. All farms can do a lot to move on from where they are today, and we've built our goals around 3 pillars. The first pillar is reducing emissions through boosting our productivity. So that's very much around the nature of farming and how we make that more efficient, how we can therefore cut our emissions. I think we've talked about the reduction in the number of machinery passes, in preparing seed beds, in reducing the number of fertilizer and agrochemical applications. That reduces energy use. It also reduces the greenhouse gas emissions footprints, products that we're cutting back on, etc. The second pillar is around storing carbon in soil and on farmland. So that's growing our hedges bigger and wider, improving the use of regenerative cover crops that get ploughed back in to increase soil organic matter, etc. And so there's a lot that farmers can do there. The third pillar is around renewables and the bioeconomy. And you'll see on the cover there, we've got a photograph of an anaerobic digester. Wind turbines are quite a common feature across parts of Cambridgeshire. Could be again if this incoming government is to be believed in terms of their desire to change previous policy that had seen a stop on land-based wind turbines. Solar energy is also a big one, where we're encouraging farmers to make use of their farm building roofs for solar energy. There is also a role for field scale solar as well. We've played an incredibly important role in trying to help government design their new environmental land management scheme. The NFU came up with the concept of a sustainable food and farming scheme, SFFS, quite difficult to say. The organizations you see there, the CLA, the TFA, and others came on board with that concept. We refined it together and submitted a paper to DEFRA. that you see there, and essentially much of that paper forms the basis of SFI, Sustainable Farming Incentive, not too dissimilar as an acronym from SFFS. And so in addition to that work, we have also put in a lot of information around what we believe the second and third tiers or components of ELMS should look like, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. One of our most recent reports has been this report on looking at soil health, because for so many reasons, getting our soil health right will help with the carbon agenda, but it will also help with the biodiversity agenda. And I think there is a sea change of attitudes amongst farmers at the moment. The way I often refer it to it is we've seen soil health go through a number of epochs of interest. 15, 20 years ago, it was all about soil mechanics and reducing compaction and things like that. We then got into soil chemistry and thinking about organic matter contents and that balance, and we're now very much in the world of soil biology and understanding the biome and understanding the interaction between soil sugars, plant roots and fungi and all the rest of it. And we all have an awful lot to learn there, and the NFU is trying to play its part in that. Moving on, we've had quite a lot to say in recent years about water management. And suggested that all industries and society as a whole needs to think about more integrated water management. And we've worked on an integrated water management strategy for farming, and that's particularly pertinent in Cambridgeshire in the east of England, where we are very short of water at times, and this summer's drought, where there have been restrictions on farmers' ability to extract water from both aquifers and surface waters for irrigation, and crops have gone unirrigated because reservoirs have fallen empty, and yet we pump millions of gallons of water out to sea every year to keep Cambridgeshire and in particular the fens dry. So we need a more integrated approach to managing that water, and there has to be more tie-up between the public water supply and farmers' needs as well. We've recently also, in response to the Glover report, put out a report on landscape and access, and the importance of maintaining landscapes and enhancing landscapes. And I think a big focus for the Doubling Nature agenda of Natural Cambridgeshire is all about how we take what we've got in Cambridgeshire and make the most of it. And I've already referred to the inverted hedge network of ditches and all that can be done with those. But we also have a very healthy stock, particularly in the south of the county, hedgerows and woodland that can be built on and improved, etc. And a lot of this needs a joined up approach to business, of which farming is a part, because you'll have heard it many times before, farmers can't be green if they're in the red. And so we need the support of all levels of government to make sure that the rural economy works for farmers and other rural businesses, so that they can deliver on this wider agenda of public goods that they're not necessarily always getting paid for. And I think, this summer's drought, the war in Ukraine has brought into focus food security in a way that has been missing from the public debate in quite some time. And so we've recently put a report out on the future of food. Much of this report is actually based around what we as an industry can do through the use of technology to increase our production efficiency, and to do that in a more nature-friendly farming way. because if we get the technology right, we can use less manufactured fertilizer, get less agrochemicals, plant protection products, and deliver both for the environment but also for security. So turning quickly to the NFU in Cambridgeshire, specifically, we have a network of 7 branches around the county that are run by group secretaries, and this is where we have a direct tie-up with the NFU Mutual. Group secretaries are actually the local partners in NFU mutual insurance agencies, so they provide us an additional resource of people on the ground working closely with members at a very local level, and they're supported by a county advisor who will be known to many of you, Helen Padfield. Unfortunately, she gives her apologies for today's meeting because she had another meeting in the diary already. But at a branch level, those members meet through the winter and have branch meetings, and we're often talking about any number of topics, and certainly the Elms scheme and environmental delivery and the Natural Cambridgeshire agenda of doubling nature have been and can be talked about at those meetings. We are proactively supportive of farm cluster groups, and in the county, we don't have the resource ourselves to set them up, but where there are willing farmers amongst our membership who have willing support, quite a lot has been done there. So I think about the RSPB helping set up the Ely Wildlife Friendly Farming Group. Flag East have been involved with farmers in the Cambridge Hundreds, looking at getting a group going there. And I think a lot of this join up of farmers in clusters is really key to future delivery at scale. We are constantly promoting to our members the opportunities around the environment agenda, whether it be what's on offer through catchment sensitive farming, natural flood management schemes like the Aukenbury Brook scheme, and needless to say, the government schemes of Elms. And I think there's going to be an increasing level of interest in local delivery of local nature recovery strategies and biodiversity net gain. We participate in a big range of stakeholder groups. I'm not going to go through the detail of any of those because I realize I'm almost at time. So my last slide, quite often within Natural Cambridgeshire and other stakeholder groups that I sit and represent our members on, I'm said, well, how do we engage farmers? Farmers never come to the table. Well, one of the reasons is because quite often they come to what they perceive to be talking shops, and they go away disappointed because there's not a concrete offer on the table. It's all very well to talk about doubling nature, but a farmer has a business to run, and public goods of biodiversity and the like often cost him dearly, and she may not want to go ahead with something if it's going to take away from the bottom line. So we have to be able to talk about how we're going to go about doubling nature in relation to the schemes that already exist that they know they can get paid for, like Elms and some of the offers under catchment farming, and then think about the value added. And I think it's incredibly exciting that at the moment there is this £1 million fund that's going to come out of Natural Cambridgeshire, courtesy of the Combined Authority, and I'm sure with the partners in Natural Cambridgeshire who can put schemes together in the priority landscapes and elsewhere, farmers will be happy to come forward with that. When people have something to offer, we can communicate via our newsletter that goes out by email weekly. We have a monthly magazine for longer articles, and we can do ad hoc and winter branch meetings as well. All the reports that I talked about and showed the covers of are available on our website. If you just go to nfuonline.com, you'll be able to find it, but that's the exact web link, and I can be contacted as per that email address. So that's me done, Pamela.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rob. That was a wonderful route through all of the NFU's work in the county and nationally as well. I think it's very exciting that we have the opportunity to be in partnership with landowners and to catalyse that collaboration and work with those existing clusters. So thank you. And we are taking questions. I see Wendy's already put a question in there, which is very useful. We're taking questions at the end of the next talk on both Rob and Lottie's talk. So we'd just like to go straight on, if that's okay, and introducing Lottie Alves, who is the Sustainable Farming Lead for the Nature Friendly Farming Network, and who has a background as an agronomist in vegetable crops. So Lottie, the floor is yours.
Hopefully Helen will, yes, there we go, be able to share my presentation for me. So yeah, thanks for Pamela for your introduction there. So yes, as she said, I'm the Sustainable Farming Lead for England for the Nature Friendly Farming Network. If you're wondering who the Nature Friendly Farming Network are, I'm not sure how many of you are aware of us. We're a farmer-led movement across the UK who believe that farming is most productive and sustainable when it works with nature. And it's great if we can combine those two aspects on our farms to make our farming very sustainable. So if we move on to the next slide. So we are seeing the effects of climate change now. We are in a climate crisis and a biodiversity crisis. We're not just seeing these impacts globally, but we're starting to see them in the UK. There's been studies that show that by 2080, there are predictions that the actual overall productive capacity of the land in the UK will have decreased considerably. And this is largely due to dry weather and drought conditions causing us not to be able to produce the same volume of food or feed or commodity products from the land as we can currently. And we're already starting to see this now. So by 2080, I can't imagine what it's going to be like. I know over in the east, you've had very, very severe droughts. Martin Lyons, who's our UK chair, who is going to do this presentation, but has been called away to something else today. He's had 10 mil of rain, he said, in the last 3 to 4 months, which is absolutely critical. He's had issues harvesting his crops, and they're now having issues with getting winter crops in this year. So it's causing really big problems. Up in the northwest where I am, we have issues, almost the opposite issue, where we're getting more of these extreme rainfall events where we get almost a month's worth of rain in a few hours, and that's causing flash flooding and whole fields to be submerged underwater. So you can see that either way, these extreme weather events, however it goes, are just causing huge problems. And we've got big targets from the government now that they've set, that we want to be net zero as a country by 2050. And within England, in the UK net zero strategy, we're saying that we want 75% of farms in England to be engaged in low carbon agriculture practices by 2030. So you can see that there's a lot of pressure on farms at the moment to be moving into these lower carbon, more sustainable agricultural practices. And that's because agriculture is the 4th largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the UK after things like energy and industry. And obviously, greenhouse gas emissions do have to be a key focus of climate mitigation and climate management. But what we also need to be focusing on and not forgetting is that actually we need to make our ecosystems more resilient. And one of the things that we have seen with kind of current agricultural practices and agricultural practices of the past, where it's been largely production and very focused on production and yield, is that they've left ecosystems less resilient to climate change. And it's not to say that production and yield are not important, it's just to say we need to now switch the focus of our farming systems to allow our ecosystems to be more resilient while still producing the food that we need to eat. So if we move on to the next slide. So our little infographic, sorry, not infographic, our little Venn diagram on the left there shows the Nature Friendly Farming Network and how we see it all fitting together. It's very much a combined approach with everything working together. So farming and producing food has to work with nature. We're trying to put this balance back into farming to deliver the solution that society needs. So it's not just about food production, it is about food production, but it's also about providing some of those other public goods services, e.g. flood management and things like that, that the society is now needing from us as farmers. So that's another really important point going forward of what farmers will actually be required to do. In this report, Rethink Farming, it's a practical guide, and it covers kind of 7 key action areas that we see as crucial to thinking about farming going into the future and how we can help elevate climate and biodiversity ambitions in the UK. And that it kind of looks at areas where farming has an integral role to play in those climate and biodiversity targets, and that would be in soil, water, biodiversity and carbon management, whole landscape approaches to kind of conserving areas and providing habitats, looking at food quality and also prosperity as well. And within that report, we've got a number of different examples of case studies from our farms throughout the UK, and lots of information for farmers as well in there about what sort of strategies they can be looking at themselves to implementing on how they can start reducing their carbon outputs and start sequestering more carbon on their farms. And that's the type of thing that we can circulate. If people are interested in that afterwards, we can circulate those out to people. But one of the key things, and this is on the next slide, is to think about how we can use on-farm nature-based solutions to actually store carbon and improve biodiversity at the same time, because it's got to work hand in hand. And it's not just about woodland. The government have been pushing a lot of information that they want to plant so many trees. Yes, trees are great, they store a lot of carbon, but actually there's a lot of on-farm habitats that actually already act as nature-based solutions if we can help capture carbon or provide adaptation to climate effects. So for example, I've just pulled out a few kind of example on-farm habitats that are kind of key in the Cambridgeshire area. So peatland with the fens would be one. There's huge restoration targets for English peatland. I think it's 35,000 hectares of peatland they want restored by 2025. And this is because currently degraded peatland is accounted, or the amount of CO2 it's releasing a year is about 23 million tonnes of CO2 a year. So we do need to be restoring some of the peatland in order to get it to act as a carbon sink and stop losing carbon from our peatland. And that's already going ahead with banning the use of horticultural peat and things like that, but there's other methods that they're going to be looking at. But peatland as well is not only great for a carbon sink, but it also supports a huge different range of species. So it's great for biodiversity. It provides natural flood management and also can be used as a sustainable supply of fresh drinking water. We've got other on-farm habitats such as hedgerows, which can store up to 100 tonnes of carbon per hectare. And they also act as a source of food and shelter for wildlife. We've got field margins around the edges of field, which can hold approximately 40% more carbon than the cropped area, which is perhaps moved and ploughed. And they can also provide shelter and food for wildlife, but also prevent erosion and pollution from potentially fertiliser or sprays that have been applied to the field. And then we've got ponds, which not only act as a good habitat for many on-farm species, but they also will store high levels of organic carbon. So you can see that actually a lot of the things that we have on farm already can be used as nature-based solutions if only we can enhance or create them on farm. So next slide. So here, oh, we can't see the infographic underneath, unfortunately. I can send that out separately. But there is an infographic underneath the picture, which is on top, which is basically our practical guide to net zero carbon farming for UK farming, which is a kind of practical guide for farmers, which provides information on lots of different topics. And the different topics kind of split into different categories. So this, the first category would be looking at where you emit greenhouse gases on your farm and looking at strategies for combating those greenhouse gas emissions. What can you do to remove some of those sources of emission, but also thinking about it. And within that, we have livestock management. So looking at if you have livestock, can you manage them in a better way to reduce your emissions? We've got crop management, there's other ways to manage your crops better to avoid emissions. Soil management as well, which comes into crop management as well, looking at that. And also fertilizer use. Can you reduce your fertilizer use or look at changing the way you're using fertilizers to reduce your emissions? Or acting as your farm acting as a carbon sink. So that would be managing your trees and hedgerows more effectively. It might be creating or enhancing the wildlife and the habitat you have on your farm and managing that slightly differently. And the last one would be water management, so protecting your water courses and planning to prevent flooding and drought issues. And the final point of all of that would be to look at whole farm management. So taking all of those different points and looking at your farm as a whole and seeing what you could do and where there might be opportunities and barriers to the uptake of some of these things for your farm and then for neighbouring farms. So if we move on to the next slide. So this is some of the things I just thought I'd go quickly through, some of the things that farmers can do now, and this is all farmers, whatever their system really. So first off, they can start by creating a whole farm plan, as I just mentioned, which looks at existing opportunities and constraints on their land for looking at all these different management practices which might help reduce emissions or improve carbon sequestration on their farm. They'd then be wanting to undertake a farm carbon audit. There's lots of different tools out there for them to do this, and they can pick the one that suits their farm. And this is basically looking at the sources of emissions on their farm and also how they can sequester carbon on their farm and looking at the balance of that and working out where they can improve. It would then be looking to protect and enhance and create on-farm wildlife habitats. That might be by introducing meadows, trees, margins, ditches, ponds, and how they manage them. Can they find areas which aren't currently particularly profitable in terms of cropping, and can they change that into a pond, things like that. Can they maintain and restore tall, thick hedgerows or trees to try and encourage them to capture carbon as well? We know, as I said, that hedgerows capture a lot of carbon, so can they maintain them better to encourage more uptake? Can they reduce the amount of artificial fertiliser used? We know that the artificial fertiliser industry creates problems with nitrous oxide and things like that, which is a lot more potent in terms of its warming effect than CO2. So it's looking at ways that you could reduce your artificial fertiliser use on farm to try and avoid those potential problems, and then thinking about reducing your energy and fuel use on farm as well. So could that be switching to renewable energy sources, having solar panels on your barns, for example? Could it be switching where possible to using energy efficient vehicles? And could you actually reduce vehicle emissions through changes in your agricultural practices, such as doing min-till, no-till, direct drilling instead of ploughing? And so it's those sorts of things that they can do in the short term, which are kind of easy wins for them. So if we move on to the longer term wins, which is on the next slide. And so this is what can farmers do as big positive changes and longer term or targeted changes. And this might actually involve some community work where farmers get in a cluster group and work together to restore an actual area of habitat. So for example, the fens. So it'd be doing kind of peatland restoration and management. And there's things that they're looking into, like polyculture, which is actually managing the fenland where it has actually re-wet slightly in areas and working out whether there are crops that you can actually grow when it's at a much higher water concentration than it is now. And also thinking about not moving the soil in the peatland in order to reduce losses to oxidation and things like that. It might be actually looking at whether you can set aside an area for planting native trees and woodland and incorporating agroforestry onto some of their land. It might be about reintroducing livestock into arable systems. I know there are these floating flocks that people are using now. There is definitely a place for livestock still within these regenerative, sustainable agriculture systems. I think we might just have to move from intensive livestock production to more extensive livestock production, because we do need the organic manure that livestock produce in order to help reduce our reliance on artificial fertilizers. And then we're thinking about other things like reducing the number of products on farm that use fossil fuels in their production. So for example, can you reduce your herbicide, insecticide, fungicide usage on farm? And can we improve the soil organic content, which will help carbon holding capacity of soils? That would be adding compost to soils or leaving straw on the top of in the field rather than taking it off, to allow for that organic matter to go back into the soil. And growing food and not feed. A lot of our land is taken up by producing feed for livestock. If we can have our livestock more extensively grazed, we could perhaps reduce the amount of feed we're needing, and therefore, even if there is a slight loss in production from reducing the amount of artificial fertilizer we're applying, we might be able to make up for that in being able to use a greater land area to produce our food. And then eventually, further down the line, be paid to capture carbon from other industries. I think currently farmers need to focus on getting their own businesses closer to net zero before they start looking at taking on the carbon of other industries. Basically, we need to work out a good balance that, and they certainly need to be paid to capture carbon for other industries. And then we need, as a whole industry, to change thinking around agricultural practices and shift towards this agroecological system thinking. So next slide. This is pretty much close to the final slide. What can you as a network or as a partnership, and what can other organisations do to help support farmers in this? As an organisation ourselves, we're hosting some ELMS and SFI, this is regional training events with DEFRA and in conjunction with DEFRA, and that will include information on other sources of funding as well. So if you know of any farmer cluster groups that might be interested, that's the sort of thing that it'd be great if you have farmer members that you can publicise to, and that will the SFI standards that are already sort of available or will be available soon are the ones looking at soil management, hedgerow management and integrated pest management. And they'll be available, if they're not already available, they'll be available next year. For sign up, there will also be county-wide local nature recovery schemes. I think Rob mentioned that in his talk as well, and that would be a great one where you can either have farmers along a watercourse or farmers in the fens working together to help protect a certain habitat or watercourse, and they'll be available for sign up next year, and it will be officially launched in 2024. It would also be working with councils or other organisations to support shorter supply chains to try and reduce food miles. So encouraging local abattoirs, trying to make sure that from the farm to the fork, it's the least distance possible. So maybe councils, if they're sourcing local produce for hospitals or schools that are under there, if they're providing food for them. And it would also be local organisations offering guidance on which are the key species or habitats in their local area that need farmer support. So we be working with farmers to show them what needs supporting in their area. And then also hosting local knowledge transfer events so farmers can come together, whether it's in a cluster group or a wider regional event, which will just show them what's been tried, what's been tested, what works, what doesn't. The NFFN are very happy to host farm open days around these kind of knowledge transfer events, because we've got farmers within the network that are happy to do that, and also providing extra case studies so people can see sort of some of the strategies that people have used in the future. And I thought, just as a final point, I would just leave you with some of the thoughts from some of the farmers within our network on this kind of subject, and that's on the next slide. Which is that nature thrives on diversity and farming is no different. A healthy farm with good soils and managed habitats makes my business more resilient. I increasingly see the role of a farmer as delivering a combination of food production, carbon capture and biodiversity. And the final one is just, it is crucial, given that species loss and climate change are now in free fall, that farmers have the government behind them, we can be and want to be part of the solution. And then, yeah, the last slide is just some information. If you want to join the network, it's free to join. We've got our website there. We've also got a Twitter account, we've got a Facebook forum as well. So if anybody's interested in getting any more information or wants any of the booklets that I referenced or anything like that, then yeah, feel free to get in touch.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lottie, and thank you also to Rob. We've got a couple of questions in the chat from Wendy and from Richard. I wonder, Wendy's question is quite multi-pronged, and I wondered if you, Wendy, might like to just come on and perhaps drag the main sort of gist of your question from those sort of water related and nutrient related questions. I suspect probably to Rob, as it's kind of a direct NFU question, but it could be more generally. Over to you, Wendy.
Well, I think people want to know what the nature of the partnership is with the NFU, with water companies. There's been a lot of discussion about this in the media, water companies are getting a lot of bad press at the moment, and Anglian Water is under an investigation for pollution. So this also relates to Richard's question about delivery. It's like, so, if you've got an integrated, catchment approach, you've got Anglian Water manage, for example, the Cameo catchment with the Rivers Trust. The Rivers Trust are a board member of Water Resources East, which was set up by Anglian Water. So, and the public wants to know, well, how does this all work? We're all in this together. That's pollution, sewage, etc. Good infrastructure is something that concerns everybody who, whatever angle you're coming from. So how does this work? Where is this? How if you've got new wetlands being set up, people are saying, well, if your water source is already polluted, and this is also being funded by a water company who's, there are certain issues about lack of investment, that these water companies are owned by global interests who haven't really, frankly, put money into proper infrastructure. So where, do you see where I'm coming from? It's people wanting to sort of tease out, how do we all do this in a disinterested, without conflicts of interest? How is this best managed? And, we want to know what the funding is.
Okay, thank you. Rob, quite a multi-pronged still question, but if you could navigate away to relatively briefly answering that, because I do think it is hugely complex, and I think it does need a really quite complex series of solutions. But Rob, over to you for now.
Yeah, well, I think Wendy has focused in on Anglian Water, so I'll focus my comments on that, in the sense that dealing with water pollution involves a lot of players, and you didn't actually mention the word sewage, Wendy, but that's what's been in the news lately. Yes. is the contribution that water companies are making because they have rainwater overflows that are taking sewage into the system. So yes, the water company is regulated by Ofwat to provide drinking water of a potable nature and not damage the environment. And as such, they are therefore allowed to spend money to keep the water clean. And their involvement with catchment partnerships is based on the fact that if they can justify spending money working with farmers and others in rural communities to clean up water before it gets to their treatment works, that reduces their costs in terms of more expensive chemical treatment in the plants. And so there is a range of investments that they do, from straightforward things like a few years ago when we still had metaldehyde as a chemical, they were paying to subsidize using less damaging alternatives. And now they're still doing a lot of work around river restoration projects, etc., that are helping farmers reduce runoff into the rivers. So that is all very positive. I haven't got figures for how much they're spending in Cambridgeshire. We'd have to ask Anglian Water for that. But I think in relation to your comment about, what's the point of having a wetland, water running into it, polluted, my answer would be we all live in the world of the art of the possible rather than the art of the perfect. And I think, what the water companies are supporting is helping clean up our water supplies. And, there are very specific instances where specific water requirements are required for specific species, whether it be around, levels of pH or levels of nutrient density. But generally, a little bit of polluted water is better than no water at all. And I think the biggest issue we have in Cambridgeshire is actually around water availability rather than the level of pollution. We've all got to work together, and that includes with the water companies to make sure that there's enough water for people, enough water for food production, enough water for nature, and that's our biggest challenge.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to close that there. Thank you very much. That was a great response. And I think it is, you know, the water companies are putting funding into creating nature habitats, these nature-based solutions, which actually halt some of the flooding and some of the pollution and from the sewage treatment works going on to, you know, land. So I think there are a variety of solutions, and certainly we were taken through some of those in the Nature Friendly Farming Network talk by Lottie, and then some more by Rob. So it's really heartening to see sort of farming and biodiversity coming together so well. Thank you. I'm now going to move on to ancient trees in Cambridgeshire, and there's lots of people saying thank you as well in the chat. So we have Tom Reed, who is the Citizen Science Officer for the Ancient Tree Inventory. Sorry, I couldn't read my writing for a moment there. Who's going to share his own slides. So Tom, do share your own slides now, talking about ancient trees in Cambridgeshire. So thank you very much. Over to you.
Hear me and see our slides okay?
Yep.
Yeah, fantastic. So thank you everyone for joining us for this part of the talk where I'm going to be focusing on the ancient tree inventory. So as Pamela introduced, I work with the Woodland Trust, and I'm the Citizen Science Officer who oversees the project at the Woodland Trust. Just got a quick link to our website here so you can read about it in your own time should you want to. It's ati.woodlandtrust.org.uk. But in this talk, I'm essentially going to give you an introduction to what the project is, why we have it, and how you can take part if you wish to, as well as showing you some examples of ancient trees already recorded in Cambridgeshire. So just very quick background to the project. It started as the Ancient Tree Hunt. That was like a HLF funded project that ended in 2011 and then has continued under the name of the Ancient Tree Inventory, or sometimes we call it the ATI for short. And this is a partnership project between the Woodland Trust, the Tree Register and the Ancient Tree Forum. And essentially it's we would describe it as a living database of ancient, veteran and notable trees. So I've used that phrase citizen science already. So essentially that means that anyone can take part in the Ancient Tree Inventory. Now, it doesn't matter if you're a member of the public, or perhaps if you manage a site, or you're a landowner or a farmer, or maybe you work for another conservation organization. Maybe you work for your local authority. Like literally anyone can take part and add trees to help us grow this database and map of ancient, veteran and notable trees. So we've currently got 190,000 records verified in the database. However, recent research suggests that in England alone, we may have only mapped 10% of our ancient and veteran trees in the last sort of 20 years that the project's been going. So there's huge scope to record more ancient and veteran trees around the UK, and that's essentially why we're trying to make it something that everyone can take part in, because we need sort of more wider participation. Essentially how the project works is we have an online map that you can browse, and you can see examples of where the trees have already been recorded here on the map. So these are the coloured icons in orange, green and purple. But before that, let's look at these grey icons. So these are what we call unverified trees. Essentially anyone who registers with the website to be a tree recorder can add these grey unverified records to our map, and then we have a network of special volunteers called verifiers who go out and visit these unverified trees, and they will basically curate the database. They'll also decide on whether that tree gets classed as an ancient, veteran or notable tree, and that dictates what colour it appears on the map. But they'll also, check some other information, such as, is the species ID correct, and is the tree in the right location, and has it been recorded in the right way? So essentially, that's an overview of how the project works and a screenshot of the map. Would strongly encourage you to sort of go away on have a look at the website in your own time and maybe visit your nearest ancient or veteran tree, and of course add more to the map if you can. Let's just have a look at some examples of trees in Cambridge though. So here I've got a screenshot also taken from the ATI website, and I was just interested in looking before this talk at how many ancient trees do we have in Cambridgeshire. So we've got 17 so far, 17 ancient trees, which probably doesn't sound like a lot. Now, based on what I was saying earlier about how we feel that we've only recorded 10% over the last sort of 20 years, we know that there's statistically it's likely that there are more to be recorded. And it's also worth saying that over the whole of the UK, there's been some recording, like more recording in some areas than others. So it's often linked with where's the presence of our active volunteers just as much as the presence of the trees themselves. So, and if we look at what's already been recorded, out of those 17 trees, obviously I know they're not all displayed on screen here, but even from what you can see out of these 6 here, we've got 4 of them that don't have an image. And when I looked at the other records, most of them don't have a photo. So, and they were also recorded quite a long time ago, like over 8 to 10 years ago. So there's actually probably a really important exercise here to actually go back and visit these ancient trees that have been recorded to the map and improve them, even by adding a photograph. As you can see, that just transforms the overall identity of that record. So I'm going to be talking about our upcoming Check a Tree Week towards the end of this talk. So keep that in mind. But if I just take a look at one of the trees that's been recorded as ancient. So this is actually currently the largest tree that we have as recorded as an ancient tree in Cambridgeshire. This is a peduncular oak measuring 7.3 meters in girth around the trunk. So that's really big for an oak tree. Anything above 6 meters is, potentially getting on for being ancient, depending on sort of conditions it's been growing in. And when we think about ancient trees, these are probably the trees that come to mind first. Those kind of big, huge examples for their species. So you imagine like gnarly trees with cavities and hollowing and decaying wood in the canopy and fungi and all sort of different habitats that all sort of coexist on the tree. So ancient trees are essentially those that are in the 3rd and final life stage. They are often, exceptionally large in size for their species as well. But it's worth me saying that different species have different life expectancies. So if we look at, say, yew trees, which live for thousands and thousands of years because they grow really slowly, we would start calling them ancient from around about 400 or 500 years of age. But if you compare that to something like a hawthorn tree, which, never achieves that same sort of size or in fact age, so hawthorn, we class them as being ancient from around about 200 years of age. So you compare it to a yew tree, as I said before, a 200-year-old yew would not be ancient, whereas for hawthorn, that is definitely towards the upper end of the spectrum in terms of their average lifespan. So it is relative for each species, but the thing that they all sort of have in common is that they are very large in size for the species and will typically have what we call veteran decay features. So this includes things like hollowing, which you can see in the next slide here. So this is also a peduncular oak. This one's a bit smaller. It's 5.7 meters in girth. What you can see here is there's extensive hollowing in the trunk. So this is a really strong indicator that you've got an ancient tree, simply because of the timescales it takes for that hollowing to naturally take part. And as trees age, they do naturally lose branches, hollow out, and those decaying wood habitats are one of those things that make ancient trees really valuable for wildlife, which is part of the reason that we want to map them, because they're like living oases for wildlife, really. You've got all those kind of micro habitats as well as macro habitats. By macro habitats, I mean larger cavities that owls, woodpeckers, even grass snakes will use, and then you've got your micro habitats, which are those smaller cavities that are really important for fungi and invertebrates. And even bats are known to use ancient and veteran trees. Even the smallest sort of thin cracks within the bark and the structure can be inhabited by bats. So they're really important for wildlife. And I'm going to talk a little bit about ancient tree values in just a moment. But here's just another nice example as well, showing that one of the things that makes ancient trees so amazing is their ability to kind of reinvent themselves and reorganize themselves as they age. So this is an elm that has fallen, and you can see it's within a farmed landscape. You can see the sort of the tracks from livestock passing right by this tree. And but this tree, although it's fallen, it is still alive. And you know, once a tree falls, it can sort of reroot, and it can continue to grow and develop new shoots. Essentially, this kind of ability to continuously reinvent themselves is one of the survival techniques for ancient trees. And just because you see a tree that's fallen doesn't necessarily mean that that tree has died. So if you get some of the roots that are still intact with the trunk, and it can regrow, we refer to this as like a phoenix tree, so a tree that's regenerating. And you can see all the moss and lichen there that's also making this tree a really important sort of living ecosystem in its own right. So just wanted to touch on quickly about ancient tree values. Obviously, different people value ancient trees for different reasons, but I just really like this image because it shows one value that I think is overlooked, and that is just their simple aesthetic appeal. So we talked about the importance to nature and wildlife, but you know, can you imagine this scene without this ancient tree? Like I think they really do add just like a spirit and character to our countryside. And from that point of view, that, you know, they're worth valuing and protecting. But in addition to that, we also say that ancient trees may have cultural or historic value as well. So some of our ancient trees may be, for example, old pollarded trees. So these were working trees that provide almost like a living link to how trees have been managed in the past. You know, I was actually on a site called Hatfield Forest last week, where you've got lots of historic pollards, and it's like an outdoor museum almost. You can see the same trees that were managed by people in the medieval period, that they farmed that landscape, and they worked with the trees to harvest the timber. And you know, they really do just provide that living link. And some trees may even have a famous historical connection as well. For example, if they're associated with a particular person or an event, for example, as well. So those are some of the reasons why we value our ancient trees, and of course why we want to map them. So if I can just finish up now by talking about how you can take part should you wish to. Maybe you already know of an ancient tree near you that's not on our map, and you might want to record it. So first of all, I'd say our website is a fountain of knowledge in terms of getting started with this. Obviously, you'll need to register in order to add a tree, so make sure you do that. But we've also got lots of recording guidance on our website. So this is just a screenshot from our how to record section, where you can click it on the links. And we've actually got some new videos that were launched earlier this year. Highly recommend having a look at those because they're a good entry point into the project. And we've also got a PDF that's downloadable. This is our recording guide, and that will give you tips on where to go and find ancient and veteran trees. It will also give an overview of the information that we record. Essentially, the key things are you need to know obviously the location of the tree, which is best submitted as a 10-figure grid reference. You need to record like the girth of the tree, so that's the circumference, normally taken at 1.5 meter height on the trunk. You can see in this photo here how to measure a girth of the tree. We've got a whole page about this, and you can see that there's someone there measuring the girth of that tree. And you know, key things like is the tree alive? Is it standing? Is it fallen? What species is the tree? Is it on public or private land? So these are all key details which you add to the record via the website. You can either do this on a PC, on a computer, or you can do it on your phone. We don't have a dedicated app, but the website is like mobile friendly, so it will adapt to being on your phone as a different layout. Other things that I should mention is we've got a printable tree recording form, which looks like this. So this is also available on our website to download and print at home. This is just useful if you prefer, like me, admittedly, I enjoy a clipboard and a pen and paper. So, you know, if this is a way of working that you also like, then you can print this off, you know, keep a copy in your car, in your bag, and then if you find an ancient tree, then you've got a way of easily recording the information. And of course, this form guides you through the type of information that you can record to the website. As well, just some tips on where you might find ancient trees. So they are, whilst we can find ancient and veteran trees almost anywhere, you know, we find them not just in our historic deer parks and in our ancient woods and wood pastures, but we do find them in urban areas as well. So churchyards are a great place to find ancient yews and other species. Typically, you know, you're more likely to find concentrations of them in areas where the land use has changed very little, which is why, you know, sites such as historic deer parks, wood pastures, like ancient woods or other woodlands, you know, those kind of environments where you're more likely to find those significant concentrations. But essentially, you know, you might find ancient trees as boundary trees as well, and you know, our farmed landscape will be a treasure trove for ancient trees, those that have survived in hedgerows or that survive as individual trees that have been retained in the middle of a field. You know, shouldn't overlook that scenario as well. So it's a case of kind of keeping your eyes peeled, really, and knowing what you're looking for. You know, hopefully now with this talk and the information on the website, you'll know to look for big trees that are decaying, and that, you know, if you find a tree that's hollowing, that's definitely the sort of tree that would be interested in learning about. And essentially, if you record a tree to the website, our verifiers will take a look. We don't always have a verifier locally, so it can take a while sometimes for your tree to be verified, but nonetheless, by adding that information to the map, that's really helping us. So just wanted to finally end with some information about our upcoming Check a Tree Week, which is taking place this October, between the 22nd of October and the 30th of October. So I've talked a lot about recording new trees, but what we're inviting people to do this October is to go and visit trees which are already on the Ancient Tree Inventory. So as I said at the start, we've been running this project for nearly 20 years now, and some of those trees that were recorded at the start of the project have not been revisited since. We even saw that some of the records in Cambridgeshire are not complete, in the sense that they don't have a photo, or they might not have been visited for a while. So it's possible that their status has changed. So we're encouraging people to go out and visit their ancient trees that are already on the map, and to basically update information where possible, particularly adding a photo, even if there is already a photo on the record, because ultimately that's going to help us understand more about the change in any state of these trees. Overall, we really want to tell the conservation story of what's happening to our ancient and veteran trees over time as well. So, you know, where are we losing them? Why are we losing them? Or what's threatening them, essentially? So by taking part in that and keeping our records up to date and revisiting them, that's going to help us to track those changes. So if you want to take part in this, it'd be helpful if you could visit our Check a Tree website. It's the Woodland Trust website. We have a dedicated page for Check a Tree where you can sign up, and by registering, that gives us an indication of how many people are likely to take part, and you'll get some reminders and hints and some advice on how to take part on the event. So do take part if you can. I just want to say, you know, thank you very much for allowing me to talk here about the Ancient Tree Inventory. Hopefully you'll want to go away and have a look, and if you do, visit our Ancient Tree Inventory website. If you have any questions about the Ancient Tree Inventory, I've included my contact details here. It's ancienttreeinventory@woodlandtrust.org.uk, And a reminder, my name's Tom Reed and I oversee the project at the Woodland Trust. So thank you very much. I'll end the talk there and stop sharing my slides.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tom. That was fascinating. And could you remind us again of the date of the Chequer Tree Week? I didn't, it said it was October. I didn't quite catch the start of it.
Yeah, of course. So it's the 22nd to the 30th of October, which should be half term for most regions. But what I would say is, obviously, it isn't just constrained to that period. You know, revisiting trees, adding trees is something that you can do anytime. So that's just like a focus week where we're trying to make a push.
Thank you so much. And we're nearing our closure time, and we still have Helen to give us a tour of the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Fund for Nature. So I think I haven't seen any questions in the chat aside from Wendy's comment around the impact of the inventory on development, and I certainly think that's a very valid comment, which will be useful to follow up perhaps later on. The extent to which the Woodland Trust is a campaigning organisation. Oh, Helen, did you want to come in?
There's a question from Daniel Pullen about, says, a slight tangent. Is there any way to square the circle on health and safety in veteran trees? So often see trees being felled as soon as they drop a limb because they are in a public open space or near a footpath. So I wonder if we've got, maybe just Tom could just quickly, if there's a response to that question about, anything that we can do to stop ancient and veteran trees being felled as soon as they drop a limb.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and yeah, quite rightly so, because often the features that make ancient and veteran trees valuable for wildlife are those that make them perceived to be risky. They're a threat to health and safety. Obviously, I think what we can do, a lot of it comes down to education and awareness. So we've produced a new guide actually that's aimed at sort of landowners and farmers about ancient and veteran trees and the importance of these habitats, and trying to explain that they're not a decaying branch is nothing to be too concerned about, but obviously we would always recommend that any threats are assessed by a trained arborist or a trained consultant. In fact, there is a specially trained group of people called vet tree consultants or vet tree specialists, and there is a dedicated list of who is a vet tree consultant on their website, and so if you need an ancient and veteran tree specialist to visit your site to give an opinion as to whether there is a threat, then that is one way. But I think part of it is, I guess, communication about the risks and the threats and the actual benefits of these habitats to nature, and kind of just trying to flip it on its head a bit, I suppose.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you, Helen, for pointing that one out as well. So we're on now to our final talk, which is about the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Fund for Nature, and particularly about the communities element of the fund, from Helen Dye, who up until I joined at the beginning of September was the sole officer of the Natural Cambridgeshire Local Nature Partnership, taking forward all of this work with the support of the trustees. So Helen, over to you.
Thank you. Let me just get the full screen up here. Bear with. I can get everybody else's slides on, but not my own. Right.
And while that's happening, I'm sure people have been spotting in the chat the excellent debate that's going on around biodiversity and farmland. So do take a look at that afterwards.
Yes, so thank you, Pamela. Yeah, it's great that there are now two of us working for Natural Cambridgeshire, so we can double nature all the more quickly and more efficiently with more hands on deck. So yeah, watch this space. Nothing's stopping us now. So yeah, just wanted to talk about the work for communities. Natural Cambridgeshire has long recognised that communities play an essential role in the whole nature recovery agenda. And so this is a revisit of some things that you'll already be familiar with, but also a bit of a explanation about the opportunities that are coming forward and what we're thinking and what we'd like to do, particularly targeting a proportion of the £1 million fund for nature, specifically with communities, and very much using an evidence-based approach to that, and very much applying this on how we build on existing community assets and some of the work we've done. So just be refreshing a bit of where we've come from and where we hope to go to, and the role that we can all play in helping to support our communities to increase their nature connectedness and contribute to the Doubling Nature agenda. So we've loosely called this Nature Recovery Now, taking a little bit of inspiration from the Net Zero Now course with South Cambs District Council. We're running there with Cambridge Carbon Footprint, but there's nothing new under the sun. But if we've got something that works, let's build on it, because I think the simpler we can make any offer we've got to communities, the better it's going to be as we transition to a sort of net zero county over the forthcoming years. Right, hang on, let's to the next slide. Just my screen is blocking my, there we go. So yeah, many of you will be familiar with Natural Cambridgeshire's priority landscapes, and the £1 million fund for nature will be targeted to benefit those priority landscapes. So just to refresh those that aren't familiar with those, it's the John Clare countryside, the Nain Valley, Connected Fens, the Great Ouse Valley, the Cambridge Nature Network, and the West Cambridgeshire Hundreds. And that will be the main focus, and has been the main focus of the work of Natural Cambridgeshire. Communities obviously form a great part of the whole fabric of Cambridgeshire. And are recognised as a really essential feature in improving local green spaces and improving nature connectedness. So yeah, just a quick, the £1 million Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Fund for Nature, which you'll be hearing more about that in the coming weeks, where the partnership hopes to fund up to 6 large-scale landscape projects of up to £300,000 each. So we're not anticipating there'll be 6 projects that will be awarded £300,000, because there won't be enough in the pot for that. But we're hoping to at least get some projects to come forward. We want people to think ambitiously, and they will also have to demonstrate a leverage and how funds will enable more funds to come forward. But watch this space, there'll be more about that. The focus of this talk is more on the communities and what the opportunities there will be for communities. So within that £1 million, we're earmarking up to 100,000 for small scale community projects anywhere in the county, in the region of about up to £2,000 per project. Grassroots projects seen as absolutely essential, and we know that there's some really good practice across Cambridgeshire. We know there are lots of opportunities, and we know that there's lots of different ways of how communities are currently getting involved in nature recovery where they live. And we also know there's a lot of professional people who are actively engaged, and we want to mobilise more communities from all corners of our communities to help to take part in building the Doubling Nature agenda at the grassroots level. So again, many of you will be familiar with the Local Nature Recovery Toolkit, which was launched in 2019, which was a collaborative effort from the partners of Natural Cambridgeshire, including Wildlife Trust, including Peterborough Environment City Trust and Neem Park Trust. And the feedback we've had from the toolkit has been very positive. It's a very accessible document which lays out all of the sort of dimensions of nature recovery at a very local level. The key aims of it were to increase key wildlife habitats, to help communities understand and appreciate and enjoy their natural spaces, to promote public health and well-being, to create resilient countryside and communities where nature is at the heart of an approach to tackling the climate emergency, and examples of best practice for sustainable development and management of parks and green open space, examples where they are championed. The feedback we've had from this has been really interesting, and we know it's a good starting point, but we know there's some work that can be done to help to chunk out, chunk down what's in there and support communities to at how they can engage in utilising the toolkit across the county for different population sizes, and look at the resources that we might need to support that. So in essence, we have local nature recovery strategies coming down from DEFRA. So we're in a really great place to be able to look at how we mobilize communities, not only to raise their awareness of some of the national policy directives that are coming down, but how that is going to affect them and the reasons for that at a very local level. And every local area is going to be different. And I think we're in this immense place of sense making and sense making for what that means for where we live, the village, the ward, 2-mile radius, 5-mile radius, and how what we can do can contribute to that whole doubling nature for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. So we've long championed nature recovery plans, which should set out medium to long-term plans for the recreation of more nature-rich habitats in parks and green open spaces. And that community nature recovery plans should be developed by local people to meet their local aspirations and reflect the nature that inspires them. And our key word there, I think, being inspires. And we know that people connect with nature in so many different ways. And it's not just about the science side of things, but very much about the heart side of things as well. So we ran a communities pilot project with the Future Parks Accelerator Programme, which was hosted by the County Council, which some of you may have been involved in or know about, and offered grants of between £250 and £750. And this was for projects from, it was actually October 2021, so sorry, a typo there, to February 2022, with the aims to achieve aims outlined in the local nature recovery toolkit. And we know that small grants can make a really big difference for people and nature. And I'll go on to show how we can say that with confidence. I'll run through this very quickly, but just to give you how we've arrived at where we've got to. We did a very short, had a very short window to turn this around, and we launched the call for applications through our collective networks, and that was the Future Park, so through County Council and local districts, through voluntary organisation, networking bodies, and sort of basic, and the partnership forum, and everybody we knew. We had 22 applications received from all corners of the county, as you can see from the blobs on the map there. So we know we can reach large and wide. Interestingly, the applications we received were from a whole range of organisations, some parish, so 36% from parish or town councils, 1 from a private individual, 2 from a registered charity, and 11 from voluntary or community groups, and a sort of general split between rural and urban, and also an interesting split. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Never mind. Let's go back quickly. Across all of the districts, with quite a lot coming from Huntingdonshire District Council area there. But anyway, and projects sites included churchyards, village greens, parks, playing fields, meadows, ponds, school grounds, urban estate, community gardens, nurseries and nurseries. So we know these are the sorts of things that communities are actively involved in and want to support the development of in their communities. We funded 9 projects, and the blobs you can see on the map, again, from the north to the south of the county, from a churchyard up in Wisbeach down to a pond in Barrington, and all in between. Again, community projects, Peacock's Meadow in Littleport, Wheatfield's Playing Field here in St Ives, a community orchard in Swavesey, another churchyard up in Barnack, Fassage Green and Lode, Orchard Park and urban development in the centre of Cambridge, and on Midsummer Common in Cambridge also. So a real range there of projects. Now I'm just going to run through quickly some of these projects which just demonstrate, I think, amazingly what communities are already doing, and also outline what potential there is to do a lot more. Swavesey Community Orchard, some of you may already know about, which is a reasonably well established orchard. Well, I say reasonably well, it was established in 2019. I think it's really interesting to look at how these projects come together. It's never one group, it's a real collective partnership approach by people who feel absolutely passionately about their local environment, their local heritage, and really want to do something. So this project was on privately owned land. So not all of this is public land by any means. A lot of it is private owned land, owned by a local family, and donated to the village to establish a community orchard, which is a way of recognising the heritage of Swavesey and the role that orchards have played in the area over time. And their initial planting and the project, as you can see, involved the whole of the community. And I love this picture of everybody who turned out to help establish that. So the grant from Natural Cambridgeshire obviously didn't help to establish this, but we enabled the purchase of some heritage fruit trees and some replacement trees which had died that previous year. But just an amazing example, I think, there of a project that's involved the whole community. It celebrates heritage. It's a really lovely place to go and walk through it and visit, and anybody can go and visit. So that was one of them. We've got another one here, wildflower strips in St Ives. And this is one I thought was a really good example of the community working together across all of the different layers of involvement. So we had Wheatfields Primary School. We had a piece of public green space owned by the District Council in St Ives, and largely just managed for recreation, no biodiversity, not huge amounts of biodiversity, just a monoculture of grass with some recreational facilities and a few trees, but a very active thoroughfare where people walk to the school, walk their dogs, get from A to B, cycle, etc. So we have a local grassroots organisation, St Ives Eco Action, which formed in response to to generate local climate action. We have the St Ives in Bloom group, and we have Huntingdonshire District Council. And so this is really just a project that came about the community getting together to go, do you know what, we could really, how about planting some wildflower strips close to the school and involving the school in that. It came from the chap at the bottom who has a hat on, who's a local professional conservationist who works for an international conservation organisation and who had just got to know the area better during lockdown. We've got the school, and that came through the networks that have been established through St Ives Eco Action. We have St Ives in Bloom who achieve gold awards for the town each year for the last 4 years, who were really keen to get involved in the north part of the town. The focus tends to be in the south part of the town. And we had the District Council who had experimented with some wildflower strips in parts of the town, but were seeking to expand that. And so this is just a really good example of the whole community coming together and what it takes to have a plan and the time actually it takes, particularly with seasonal considerations around the wildflowers. As it happened, in this occasion, the wildflowers were probably planted a little late, and we've had such a dry summer that they haven't really achieved their full potential. But nevertheless, the planting was a very fun day. And we hope that the flowers will come back stronger and more colourful next year. But a really good start there of how communities can begin to work together on that. This is an urban example. So the grant from Natural Cambridgeshire on that previous one paid for the purchase of the wildflower seeds. So this is an urban example, Orchard Park in Cambridge, which is a development in Cambridge North. Some of you may know about that. And the development, the local public spaces were, as often the case, not maintained well by the developer. The community are transient, and so walk past, drop their litter, etc. And so the community group here really wanted to care for those spaces, plant bulbs, plant trees, engage the community. So bulb planting, lots of community engagement, getting people together to form, to build some social capital and reward efforts for volunteering. And so some of the quotes, I think, is a really nice quote that they came up with. Community managed space feels like our place, that it belongs to everyone, not a faceless body. Residents are less likely to merely complain about the facility and more likely to set to work to improve them. So they're a really good example of how communities come together. And this is the last one of the example that we have, which is more of a traditional pond restoration in Barrington, which has a wonderful village green, if you know it. It's a very large project, and the grant that Natural Cambridgeshire gave was a contribution to some fundraising that the parish council there had already done, or it's a charity, I think, which is managed by the parish council, which looks after the green. So unmanaged, overgrown and choked with invasive species, and then the area reshaped, reseeded banks and installation of pond dipping platforms there, with a view to enhancing that whole green space for the local community and engaging more people in that over time. So our key findings were that communities are resourceful, creative, enthusiastic and motivated. Passion and enthusiasm are equally as important as specialist knowledge and professional experience in all of these projects. Often the specialist knowledge and professional experience is needed up front to devise a plan, a 5-year site management plan, and then the passion and enthusiasm of the community drives it forward. A motivated and proactive community drives interest and inspires support, including from the town and parish council. Often it's not the town or parish council leading, it's another group or just an individual who knows and can see what needs to be done and mobilises the community around that. Local councils and landholders working together can do more to enable nature recovery projects on their land, and building capacity to enable more communities to acquire skills and knowledge and embed learning for the long term. And there's a lot more that we can be done to identify sites for nature enhancement close to where people live. They were the key findings. So in terms of this opportunity time that we find ourselves in for communities, and that I recognise that there are lots of other potential pots of money that can help to mobilise those communities and double nature on the doorstep. What's the offer that we can sort of promise we can collectively as a group here, begin to formulate? These are just some of my thoughts of how we begin to perhaps think about a natural health service for residents of Cambridgeshire, that residents have access to high quality green space within, say, 200 metres of where they live, that residents have an opportunity to help to shape and take part in local nature recovery activities wherever they want to across the county, that residents understand the value and importance of biodiversity and green space, their own well-being and the communities. And that also, I guess, relates to things like water resources and how we manage our water resources and understand the connection between the lives we want to lead and our farming and agricultural community and other industries around us. And key to getting people involved, obviously, is voluntary efforts are acknowledged, celebrated and rewarded. And we've got a lot of, again, really good examples of that. I go back to the Swavesey Orchard and also a really good report, The Power of Placemaking, the report Powerful People, Powerful Places, which was a really good study, which the Woodland Trust with the Fabian Society and another organisation published in 2017, but I think it still rings very true. People need permission to act. Participation for people to get involved needs to fit with everyday lives, and people's lives are often busy and complex. And people need to know that their participation is making a difference. So nature recovery now, what do we envisage and what we would like to develop and have the ingredients for, working with our partners towards a sort of offer for Cambridgeshire that's going to help to double nature at that very local level. Access to education, training and advice, skills development, including networking, grants, including the dispersal of funds, community-led local nature recovery plans for every parish or every site. Find a way to identify a simple way for people to nominate areas of green space that could be managed better for nature, and technical assistance to groups who wish to gain legal permissions and the other technical aspects that are absolutely necessary to get in place before you can sort of mobilize lots of people around the whole tree planting, bulb planting, maintenance, community gardens, community orchards. And I think there's a recognition that there's a role for everybody within this, and how we organise that is going to be absolutely critical. And what Natural Cambridgeshire hopes to do through the £1 million fund is to be able to offer grants to help to do that, but also to support the infrastructure around that, by working with partners so that we can really develop a value for money offer that mobilises everybody's interest and support and gets the best results for Cambridgeshire. So that's me in a nutshell, and I hear we're closing on to past. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Brilliant. And I thought thank you, Helen. That's a fantastic tour de force of all of the inspirational things that have already been done. I'm in kind of week 3 here, and it's already really clear to see there's a huge amount of energy and enthusiasm and so much that's being done already for nature. I thought I would just thank all our speakers formally, and then if there are a couple of questions, if anybody wants to stay for those questions, if we do slightly crash the past, then I don't wish to be responsible for that for the entirety of everyone. So thank you very much to all our speakers, some of whom have left already, but to Antony Mould, Rob Wise, Lottie Alves, Tom Reed and Helen Dye, to all those who've contributed questions, and to all those to whom you've taken part in the debate and who've been present for such an inspiring morning. So thank you very much, everyone. And so if anyone does need to leave, that's completely fine. And if anybody would like, we also have a question in here about monitoring, a question about nature reserves, and a thank you from Lottie for an invitation. So Helen, I don't know if you want to just answer the question about the reporting requirement.
Yeah,
monitoring evaluation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the information that was generated from our pilot project showed that there's really strong engagement. People do understand how what they're doing fits into a bigger picture. And you know, my sort of, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could look at how we utilize that engagement and the information we gather to feed into building that data set for community level work, and working with the Wildlife Trust, with CPERC, with whoever, so that we can, you know, sort of develop a citizen science sort of network, if you like, for Cambridgeshire. And I think we can do that. I don't think it's actually that difficult to do. And I know that the data that we actually got from the pilot projects, it doesn't give me, you know, I see no reason why we can't do that, and do that really well to help really instruct and inform and feed back to communities the actual difference they're making to the bigger picture by just doing something small, whether that's in a churchyard, on the estate where they live, or the school playing field. It all makes a difference, and the better we can show that, and the more effectively we can show that, I think that's something we need to look at, and involve all partners around the table about how best to do that.
Brilliant, thank you. And there's been a debate about how you make monitoring proportionate as well, and so that we can collect this, everybody's doing things for nature, but also we don't make it so much of a burden that people don't participate. And we've also had a question around the talks, and I know we're going to send the recording round, and I don't know whether we will receive the slides, speaker contact details. I presume that will happen.
Just on the comment about we don't want to create a burden, I actually found that in a lot of the projects that came forward, they're very professional people that were sort of leading on the project. And so this is something that they can do in their sleep. None of it was burdensome. The processes that we had, people fed back how simple it was. And so we tried to keep it quite light touch, but actually the information that came forward, even in the applications, was very, very rich and very informative. So I don't think, I don't perceive at this stage that monitoring would be burdensome because of the expertise that existed, and the expertise that was happily to be shared around as well, where there were professional people leading on these. They were very happy to be involved in helping to shape a broader network for the county as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Peter, for arranging it. And thank you to everyone for participating. We will close the recording now and close the call. Thank you.